views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey everybody, it is time for the Bronx Buzz. As you probably know by now, every week we interview a couple of Bronx reporters and talk about all kinds of different issues and things going on in the borough of the Bronx. We get a little insight into who they are, what they're writing about, maybe what they're thinking about when they do their writing. And tonight we have two very interesting guests, both of whom have been with us before, but you know, they have a lot to say and they've been doing a lot of work. Sitting in the studio with me is Samar Khurshid from Gotham Gazette. Nice to have you back with us.
Thanks, Gary.
And all the way over there on the other side of the city, somewhere down in Manhattan, I guess, it is our old friend Michael Benjamin, who is on the New York Post editorial board. And you are on Skype talking to us from the New York Post, right?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Michael, draft of it for tomorrow. Go ahead.
Michael, hang out for a couple of minutes. We're going to chat with Samar about some of the things he's writing about, and then we're going to get into you in the New York Post and some of the other things you've been involved in. So let's start with you, Samar. A lot going on. First of all, just in general about Gotham Gazette, we were talking just a moment ago. You said you're real busy down there. The editor's busy. Everybody's crazy busy.
Well, it's budget season, so every week is budget hearings at the city council. The mayor's been there's been a lot of news about the mayor recently. You know, the state and federal investigations against his administration, they concluded. They didn't bring any charges against anyone. So the mayor feels vindicated there. And then just yesterday, he sort of suffered a little bit of a blow because the Conflicts of Interest Board ruled, well, at least they issued an advisory opinion that said any legal defense fund that he wanted to set up, as he'd planned to pay his legal fees, would have strict restrictions, which is like a $50 limit on donations.
So he's going to need to pay for his legal fund, it would appear.
Well, he could use city funds, but he says he's not comfortable with that because the city's already spent about $10.5 million on defending his aides and other people in the administration, and that's all outside legal fees. The mayor himself, he says that he's not comfortable with the taxpayers paying his bills because he's the head of this operation. I
want to get into that a little more, but I want to just backtrack. And you're down there at City Hall essentially every day, right?
Yeah, every other day.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the relationship between the mayor and the Speaker of the City Council and some of the council members. Now, my interaction with many of the council members, certainly the Bronx ones, is that, you know, I get the sense, and this is just my own impression, that they need the mayor. They don't want to offend him. But, you know, if you really cornered them or got them when they were off record, they would say, yeah, I don't quite love the guy. What is your assessment? Let's start with the mayor and the speaker first.
Well, the speaker's been a very close ally of the mayor. And it's that dynamic at times has played out in ways that people have been critical of, that the speaker is not willing to oppose the mayor. She's not willing to bring a bill to the floor unless it has the mayor's support. And that's played out with the Right to Know Act, which hasn't received a vote because they reached a compromise with the NYPD. And it's played out with...
She took a lot of heat over that.
Yes, exactly.
And if you follow Melissa Mark Viverito's career and the things she's been outspoken about, that would be strange because that was just the kind of thing that she was generally a very strong advocate for.
Exactly. So there's been instances where people have said that the speaker doesn't stand up to the mayor as strongly as she should. And
let me I'm sorry, I must interject, because the nature of our government, and we're certainly getting a royal education about that with our federal government, is the idea of checks and balances, so that you have, you know, the mayor, then you have the legislature, and of course the judicial branch and all that. And if the legislature is not at least one of the balances on you know, executive power, then you know, maybe the government breaks down. On the other hand, it's nice if they are together, because then in many cases you can move things forward pretty easily.
Exactly, and that's been the dynamic of this administration. The mayor, a very progressive mayor, a very progressive city council, with a progressive caucus, number of members of the progressive caucus, I think about more than a dozen, who share those same values. But at the same time, there's been members who have been willing to stand up to him, who've been very critical of his policies on policing, for instance. There's been Rory Lansman, Jumaane Williams, and this is not to say that they don't agree with him, they disagree with him on everything, but there's certain issues that they take, they stand contrary to him.
Let's go back and Michael Benjamin, hang in there, because I know we're going to kind of break the format, and we're going to, because I know this is something that you know a lot about, is this idea of the mayor's legal defense fund. How badly, politically and in terms of his reelection, do you think the mayor was hurt by this whole process, even though he's ultimately been vindicated? But now, there's a little jab here, so to speak.
Right.
Do you think politically he was hurt badly? I mean, I think the poll numbers show he's going to be reelected.
Well, it's funny. The poll numbers actually have been better than they've been before.
That's what I'm saying.
And even polling against any of the a number of the opponents, polling against some of the opponents, has showed that the mayor is going to beat them soundly. But of course, politically it's been bad. He's had about almost a year of bad headlines, and if it was one bad headline after another, at the end he's not completely unscathed, because the state prosecutor, Cy Vance, said that while he couldn't bring charges, he urges either the BOE to bring regulatory civil action. He said that they could bring civil or regulatory action, and that is something that's unclear whether that's going to happen or not.
Michael Benjamin, I could ask about any of the number of things that we talked about, but do you have, I'm sure, knowing you all these years, I'm sure you have something to say about some of the things you've heard. What strikes you about what we've been talking about?
Well, I think most importantly for the mayor is that he really has not been hurt by the scandal. The fact that Scott Stringer, our borough president, friend of our borough president, Ruben Diaz Jr.
Well, you're showing your age there.
Yes, I know. And they're not challenging him because they know that there's nothing to challenge him on, where they could win in a Democratic primary that tends to favor very liberal, very left Democrats. So, and they don't distinguish that much differently from him. So for them to run in a primary against the city mayor would be very near suicidal. So that explains why nobody's really challenging him. I went to the Reform Party's mayoral forum the other night, and you had Sal Albanese, who ran 4 year ago, and then you had 4 or 5 other folks who had never run before for mayor, and really have no shot at winning in a primary or in a general right now.
Well, and that leads us actually to another article that Samar wrote about Massey making public safety a campaign issue, and as you've already documented, there are people in the city council and throughout the city who are not happy with the mayor and his relationship with Bill Bratton, et cetera, et cetera. Is it possible in this day and age, in this day, in this climate, for a Republican in New York City to defeat a Democratic mayor, especially given the way the National Republican Party is looking to New Yorkers right now?
Nothing's impossible, but but it'd be extremely difficult for Massey to mount a significant challenge against the mayor. Paul Massey is he's relatively unknown. He recently moved to the city from Larchmont. That's something that the mayor's team criticizes him for, that he's not a true New York City resident. And he's a bit green on policy. He when he started his campaign, he didn't have a lot of strong policy positions. He opened with saying that he hasn't established an answer on stop and frisk yet. Since then, he's sort of said that he's going to release a lot of detailed policy positions. He said on stop and frisk that he encourages, he believes that it should be left up to the police to determine how to use it. So he's not going to be able to appeal to a lot of voters across the city. The city's enrollment is tilted towards Democrats, and the mayor's got a really strong record on UPK, affordable housing now.
Let me reach out to Michael Benjamin, who's over there at the New York Post. Now, the New York Post, obviously a right-leaning newspaper. Do people at the New York Post believe
right,
that...
We are mostly right, correct about everything.
Say it again?
We're mostly right and correct about everything.
Well, okay. You can characterize it any way you'd like. But do people over there and in general think that there is a place for Republican politics in New York City, where immigration is certainly in the borough of the Bronx. Immigration is a big thing. Reliance on healthcare, reliance on all different kinds of and so-called entitlements and all those kinds of things. These are things that Bronxites are concerned about. We have a Bronx Republican Party that's trying to reform. Do you think that there's a mood out there that this is a good time for Republican politics in New York?
Well, it's always a good time for Republican politics in a sense where you want to have a vigorous two-party, three-party system where you have parties checking each other and then offering the public different policies. For Republicans, conservatives is about fiscal conservatism, it's about keeping government small and not too broad and overreaching and overregulating everyday life. I think that's important to them. You also, when we're looking at somebody like Paul Massey, you have to remember that it took a crisis in Crown Heights to allow and enable Rudy Giuliani to defeat an incumbent mayor, David Dinkins, almost 30 years ago. And then now, in 2001, it took 9/11 for Republican Mayor Michael Bloomberg as an unknown challenger to defeat a well-known, Democrat in that primary. So it takes crises for Republicans apparently to win in New York. And this year in 2017 doesn't appear to be any looming crises on the horizon. But you can never tell what might happen on August 15th or September 30th, which might propel people to look more seriously at let's say, a Paul Massey or a Sal Albanese if they should make it to selection for a November election.
I'm going to strongly agree with you on the importance of a strong political system and strong parties. And it made me think of something, Michael. I'm stepping out of the context of this particular program, but it occurred to me when I heard you were coming on the show. You and I have been doing this, I can't even think of how many years. We have, when I had that morning show on BronxNet television, you were a regular person. And the fact is, which we both know, you and I don't agree on a lot of things. We didn't agree on a lot of things, but we both agree that it's important that we have this dialogue. And that, to me, is the same thing when it comes to, politics in New York City.
When I was in the Assembly in Albany, there was a lot of dialogue between the Republicans in the Assembly, even though they're a severe minority, there's still dialogue with them. In the state Senate, dialogue between the Republicans and the Democrats, it's important to come across with policies that are good for the public. Not everything ought to be polarized. And that's the sense I'm getting with what happened over the last 8 years with President Barack Obama, and now these last 68, 70 days under President Trump, where everybody's sitting in their corner throwing rocks at each other rather than trying to figure out how do we come together for the betterment of our nation. And
right.
That's what many of us would prefer to see happen than people sitting in their corners only listening, to their own echo chamber.
Well, let's talk about an issue that you disagree basically with the trend in borough leadership here in the Bronx, and that is the idea of specialized high school exams. You're a Bronx High School of Science graduate and very passionate about the process that exists where there is an exam that is the admissions test to get into Bronx Science and, of course, all the other specialized high schools. Let me just offer a proposal that came from, I believe it was the Community Service Society, that said that the current systems aren't working. The system that the mayor put in place where they were offering prep support, et cetera, and they're recommending that the students that finish in the top 3% of their middle schools should automatically be offered admission into these specialized high schools.
David,
I know you disagree with that, but I'm just laying it out there. What do you think?
And the reason for my opposition to that is that rather than going through shortcuts, I think we should focus on the hard work of trying to fix and actually successfully fixing our middle schools. Middle schools serve as a pipeline to the specialized high schools, particularly middle schools and elementary schools that have gifted and talented classes, which are basically accelerated learning. There are so many African American and Hispanic children and others who could benefit from accelerated learning, but they don't have that opportunity in many of our schools. I commend Borough President Diaz and Borough President Adams for pushing for more gifted and talented classes in their respective boroughs, because they then serve as a pipeline to specialized high schools. I think that's where we need to go, and also more effectively focus on how do we manage and better and make our middle schools better so many more children are successful in middle school. One reason why I am opposed to the Community Service Society idea of a top 3% of middle school students gaining automatic admission to the specialized high school is that the middle school education experience is so disparate across our city. Is it fair to a person who's, let's say, is in the top 4% of his high school in Queens, and a child who's in the top 3% of his middle school, let's say in the South Bronx, where he hasn't been exposed to a lot of science and math?
Because the schools are not the same, is what you're saying.
Schools are not the same, experience are not the same, and when you go to, whether it's college or to a specialized high school, the environment is really tough. There's a lot of pressure on you to succeed. And if you're not prepared to succeed in a big environment, you're not going to do well. I don't want to see students who come into an environment where they sort of even though they may be bright, they still are not prepared enough to succeed in a high pressure situation. I think it's better that we prepare them early on. And I would give the IDC, Jeff Klein's idea, and the mayor's idea of more prep longer time to work. You can't look at something after 1 year.
We're going to need to take a break, but let me just ask you one question. I think we can all appreciate the fact that we want all the middle schools, of course, to deliver the same level of education, and we want the middle schools to improve. We can evaluate the difficult performance of many of our middle schools, and everybody knows what the story is there. Does it make sense to do that now before we've done the groundwork and keep the system and still deny potentially deserving students the opportunity to get there, or fix the schools first and then change the system?
What the test is not denying them success. What's denying them success is attending a miserable middle school where there aren't enough resources in the schools and resources to enable the truly bright students to excel and be prepared for the environment of a specialized high school. If you look at what's occurring now, many of the students who are getting it, not because of test prep, it's because they go to excellent middle schools. When you break it down, most of the students come from about 20 or 25 middle schools from across the city. The city has over 300 middle schools. How do you wind up with maybe, 1/8 of them sending students to the specialized high schools?
Right. Your passion for this issue is infectious. Thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. We're here today on the Bronx Buzz with Samar Khurshid from Gotham Gazette and Michael Benjamin, who is via Skype downtown at the New York Post. We'll take a short break. We're going to come back. More scintillating discussion right after this.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go long, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Our two guests today, Samar Khurshid from Gotham Gazette. He covers City Hall for that, I would say publication, but now we call it a blog, and you can see him live on Skype. It is Michael Benjamin at the New York Post. Michael, let's talk about something that came up just the other day. I didn't even mention to you that we were going to go here, but I'm sure you have some thought on it because I know you believe in the political process. You've participated in debates on my program. Some of the people who are wanting to run for Speaker of the City Council are saying they would rather not have a public debate, saying that this is an internal decision, that you can have a public debate, but the general public doesn't get to vote anyway. So they're saying they don't want a public process. What are your thoughts on that? And I know because I moderated a forum at New Settlement Houses when Melissa Mark Viverito and Jimmy Vacca and some of the others were running this time. Do you think we ought to have public debates?
I went to a number of them 2013 as well.
Okay.
I think that they're informative to give the public a chance to see who the personalities are and what they want to offer. Yes, it's true the vote will be made by members of the council. Whether there's input from the various county leaders and others that are out there to have some sort of leverage and have interest in seeing who gets made, who becomes the next city council speaker. I think the public needs to hear what their ideas are. I think it was beneficial to us in 2013 to hear Melissa Mark, Mark Weprin,
Jimmy Vacca from the Bronx.
Interested in talking about why they see a vision for themselves as Speaker of the City Council. It takes the backroom politics out of the back room, at least let some of the more active people in the community and also newspapers and reporters understand who wants to run, what is it they want to do, and see what they offer. And I think it's important that this crop, whether it's a Julissa Ferreras or it's Corey Johnson, it's maybe even Vanessa Gibson, who's talked about, or Richie Torres, who's been talked about as a potential person to run for council speaker, for them to get out there and let their thoughts be known by the public. And then whatever you do in coalescing with the various county delegations or with various individual members to try to get their vote, at least the public knows who's running and what they're offering.
Okay.
I think it's important. I think that they're wrong to say they don't want to be a
Samara is down there at City Hall. What's the buzz?
Well, I think Michael's right. The speaker's job doesn't stop once they're elected speaker. Their speaker represents, in effect, the city as much as the mayor does, because they represent the 51 council members, the 50 other council members on the council. So it's important.
So you're agreeing with Michael Benjamin?
Well, community groups, advocacy groups, they work through those 4 years with the speaker. They work with the speaker on issues, on bills. The council relies on nonprofits for their input as much as the nonprofits rely on the council. So it's important for that dynamic to be set up early, for them to know where the speaker stands on issues, on which issues that speaker might represent them on, and how that relationship might eventually evolve, and how the speaker might deal with the mayor.
Right, and so I would say, going around our round table here on the Bronx Buzz, I agree with both of you. I think so we've just voted right here. The people are just so disenfranchised from government. We know what happened in the federal government because of a lot of disenfranchisement. And I think, for example, that a session that I moderated, I think there were 6 candidates at New Settlement Houses. I think it was incredibly valuable for the community. And frankly, you can put editorial comment here, it scares me that elected officials would like to have a private debate and not a public debate when it comes to something like that. I want to bring up something else, and we'll start with you, Samar, and then we'll go to Michael Benjamin. The talk in Washington about the budget. Now, I use an example that I brought up on our show when we had a couple of representatives from the Bronx Republican Party. Richie Torres says, and he's the chair of the Public Housing Committee, says that we need $15 to $17 billion just to get public housing up to snuff. The first word coming out of Washington is that there's going to be a $35 million cut to start. We're never going to move the thing forward if that's the attitude. What do you feel are the most significant issues coming out of Washington as regards a budget, and what are the people downtown saying they're scared most of if in fact some of these budget cuts come through once Trump and the Republicans get a hold of it?
Well, the proposed federal budget has thrown everything into disarray. The state budget might get extended because of it. The city budget is under threat in so many ways. The comptrollers warned that it's going to rip the safety net to shreds, because the people who are going to be most affected are the most vulnerable people in the city: seniors, low-income people, people who depend on affordable housing. And one of the major issues is anti-terror funds to the NYPD. Their proposed cuts to sanctuary cities, it would chiefly affect that $110 million in stuff that goes to buying equipment, for paying for officers and all this stuff.
So these are not entitlements, and these are not auxiliary things or luxury items. This is, of course, the security.
And this is the same force that is keeping keeping Trump Tower safe, and Donald Trump is proposing cuts to that force.
To that service. Michael Benjamin, your thought about the threats that we've heard? You know what? If you play sanctuary cities with us, we're cutting off your funds. What are your thoughts? Can Michael hear me? I don't know if we heard. Maybe we lost. We lost him. They're going to try and get him back again. So in terms of the whole notion of sanctuary cities, do you think that this backs off the powers that be to say, you know what, maybe we ought not to take a chance, and we'll kind of concede or make some concessions when it comes to either protecting immigrants or immigrant rights, or having New York be a beacon of whatever the governor and mayor believe that we ought to be a beacon of?
If you're saying, do the city authorities think they should back off?
Yes.
They won't.
They won't.
They will not.
They will dare the federal government to do it.
They will dare. They've said they'll resist. That's the first thing that Melissa Mark Viverito said that to Donald Trump. She said, "I'm going to resist." And
right.
They've passed measures that ban ICE agents from Rikers.
Right. But I want to go back to Michael before we run out of time. So, Michael, I don't know if you heard the dialogue that we were talking about, and Samar was talking about the threat from the federal government that the whole sanctuary cities notion will lead to serious budget cuts for New York City.
It's
Your
quite
thoughts?
possible that the federal government's threat is a reasonable one that they can make. The federal government made threats to southern states that didn't want to segregate their schools, didn't want to segregate their highway rest stops, etc. The federal government has that kind of leverage. We don't need to take their money. I think it's interesting that people who complain about the militarization of the police are now complaining that he wants to cut money to further militarize the police. It doesn't make
You're
sense
funny,
to me.
Michael. I like you. You are funny.
That's what they're talking about. But I think what's really concerning is that, as a control point, there are some of the cuts in the safety net. I think this administration has been a little bit even further to the right than Ronald Reagan was 35 years ago, and people had concerns about him and what he was planning to do. This investment in public housing has been occurring under Republican and Democratic administration, so what they're proposing is nothing new.
Right.
Our problem in New York is that our public housing is almost 50 to 60 years old, and it needs to be in some way replaced, not necessarily,
rebuilt,
refurbished.
Yeah. Michael, we're going to have to end the program, so I'm going to have to cut you off. It has been absolutely a treat to have you on Skype from downtown in the New York Post, and I hope Michael will find many opportunities to have you back on the Bronx Buzz. I guess he's gone, but thank you very much. Samar, same for you. It's really great to have you. We read your work. Everybody, you can always find them on GothamGazette.com.
And we're a publication. We're not a blog.
Oh, that's true. They are. All right. I can't get it right every time. Listen, we will have the controller of the city of New York on Bronx Talk this Monday night, so that's going to be a good show. And we'll be on, of course, all week long. We'll do it Monday night. So that's it. We're done buzzing here for next week. Good night.